Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. Welcome to today's WFRN VCS event, Making the Most Out of Conferences. I'm Jen Hook, WFRN's Vice President, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone here on behalf of WFRN's leadership team, our President Ellen Galinsky and Executive Officer Steve Sweet. I also want to recognize the sponsorship of the Population Research Institute at Penn State University. Before introducing our speakers, I want to acknowledge that by joining us today, you're consenting to recording. The recording will be posted on WFRN's website for those who can't join in person today. I also want to acknowledge that events are made possible by the generous support of our members. If you're not a member yet, I encourage you to check out our website to learn more about WFRN and the benefits of membership. We'll pop a link to membership in the chat. And finally, we hope to see you at our in-person conference June 20th to 22nd in Montreal on the theme Big Questions in Work and Family. With that, I'm pleased to turn things over to our moderator, Kimberly French. Kim is Assistant Professor of Industrial Organization Psychology at Colorado State University and recent WFRN Early Career Fellow. Her research focuses on how managing work and family affects the health and well-being of individuals and their family members. Over to you, Kim.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jen. And thanks so much to everybody for being here. We're so excited to see you all and share a little bit of the knowledge of our outstanding panelists today. So I'm actually going to kick it right off to our panelists to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their name, their position, their roles relevant to WFRN, and then how they approach conferencing. So I'll go ahead and throw it to Matt first.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Piszczek. I'm an associate professor of management at Wayne State University in Detroit. I'm on the executive board of WFRN as of very recently, and I was the former membership engagement committee chair for the last several years. So I'm happy to be here. I'll tell you a little bit about my approach to conferencing as suggested. My goals for a conference is usually to find, well, this is a message I think this group will appreciate, a good balance of having a good time and accomplishing some professional goals. So I try not to get burnt out at conferences. I try to just focus on the parts that are going to really be the most beneficial. And I noticed over the years that if you try to kind of do everything, you end up not doing anything as well. So I think it's important to take a good balanced approach to conferences. And I usually have some specific goals I set for each conference, but I won't talk about those yet. We'll save that for later. So yeah, that's me, Matt Piszczek.
Kim, you were muted.
Oh, sorry. Sabrina, you want to go ahead and go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sabrina Speights. I'm an assistant professor of business and management at Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts. I just recently rolled off of the WFRN exec board, but when I was on it, I was the point person for networking communities as well as our DEI initiatives, particularly around Global South initiatives. And my approach to conferences, I go to the conferences I go to have different vibes, and my roles in them are a bit different. And so I said, I have a different approach if I'm going to a conference where I'm kind of like swimming in a sea of people, and different approaches if I'm kind of like in the in crowd and I've been involved and I might be on the board or something like that. But I think it does kind of come down to, I like Matt's approach of, I do kind of have some goals and try to go to conferences with a bit of intention. I would say kind of is the general approach that I would take.
Thank you. Heejung?
Hi, I'm Heejung Chung. I'm currently professor of sociology and social policy at the University of Kent, but quickly going to be moving to professor of work and employment at King's College London, so in London, UK. I was the executive board member of WFRN. I want to say from 2019 to 22, but something around then. And I was also I am a part of the international committee as well. So my approach to conferencing, and I'm going to probably say this numerous times, is to have fun and network. And I feel like because with the online communities, we can have, I think, a lot of what I like to do in person, especially because I don't go to many conferences given the climate emergency. So I really, when I go, I'm like, I want to meet people in person, face to face, and just like have fun. But also, I think this is a great place, conferences, especially WFRN, just to get to know the new and upcoming ideas and methods and really be able to open yourself up for that in a way that you will never be able to in kind of online environment, but also just looking at journals, etc. So yeah, that was me.
Thank you so much. And Steve.
It's Steve and a dog that wants to bark right now for some reason. So apologies for that. Well, I'm Steve Sweet. I'm professor of sociology at Ithaca College, which is an undergraduate institution in upstate New York. And I'm also the executive officer of the Work and Family Researchers Network, which is just an absolute joy for me. I would say as to the question of sort of how do I pick conferences, and I would say something different from other people. I look at the location. Oh my goodness, I've had such good fortune in my career to go to places like Barcelona, Tampere, Lisbon, Milan, Brisbane, and on and on and on. And I'm especially looking forward to going to Montreal. It's a wonderful venue. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit. But looking at the location, because part of conferencing is going and having an experience beyond our own home communities.
I love that you raised that point. I also consider location, especially now that I'm in my faculty job and have some funds to do that. So awesome. Thank y'all for that lovely introduction. So we'll go ahead and get started. We have a few planned questions, and if anybody has questions as we're going through, please feel free to pop those in the chat, and I will be checking that out as we're going along. And then of course there will be time for just broad Q&A at the end. So I'll just get us started off with thinking about before the conference. So what do y'all do to prepare for the conference, and how do you set yourself up for success before arriving?
I'll start again. So I mentioned I usually have some specific goals in mind for every conference I go to. I never really systematically thought about this, I guess, but in preparing for this, I kind of narrowed it down to 4 things. Number 1 is to meet new potential colleagues, so the networking. Number 2 is to learn about new and interesting work in the field. Number 3, get feedback on my own work. And number 4 is to help increase my visibility as a scholar, which was especially important pre-tenure because I was thinking like, anyone at this conference could be writing me a tenure letter, so I have to make sure people at least know who I am. So when I prepare for a conference, those are the things I'm generally keeping in mind. And I guess there's one more thing depending on the conference. I think Sabrina made a really good point about the nature of the conference and the different vibes. So like if I'm going to Academy of Management, which has 11,000 people and relatively few sessions that are work family specific, and even then less in my niche area of work family, I try to reconnect with people a lot at conferences too. So to prep for a conference, I'm often reaching out to people that I met at previous conferences, or even like just my friends, my former co-authors who maybe we haven't worked on something in a while, and using that as an opportunity to reconnect with people, which, helps cement the relationships that you have with folks that you've established in the past. Because, we work with lots and lots of different people. We have passing interactions with lots and lots of people, but, the people that you really value the connections with, you want to keep those going even when there's not any anything concrete to them, like research wise. You're not working on a project, but for me, it's like, hey, let's get a beer, let's get a coffee, let's get dinner, even if it's just for half an hour, let's catch up. So that's really important to me, and that's what I do a lot at Academy. At like WFRN, where every session is something that is directly applicable to my research, I'm probably spending more time poring over the conference and like program and planning out what sessions I'm going to go to, which specific people I'm interested in their work and who I want to go meet at the session, and I try to meet them at the session. So yeah, I think going over the schedule and the program is really important if you're going to be seeking to meet people, especially at these more disciplinary specific conferences. But I could go on, but I think I've already spoken enough.
I'll chime in because mine is, I think more, I took this question very literally and I was like, okay, so what do I actually do? And so I took the approach of if I am kind of pouring over the program, to use Matt's phrase. And so I was thinking like, okay, what behaviors do I engage in like before a conference? And so I had written down like I would review all the sessions and actually overcommit on like it's fine, like I'll just, because there's usually oftentimes like a function where you can kind of build a program or you can kind of build one on your own, and I will just like pile them in like, yep, that looks cool, that looks interesting, this person maybe, I don't know, and then what I have done is that is what I use when I'm at the conference. I don't go back to the big complete program. And then on any given day, based on my level of energy, any kind of like new interactions that I've made with people or something like that, I will choose kind of which sessions to go to or to not go to, kind of based on that. Because I think, again, as I mentioned, conferences have different vibes, different sizes. Like again, like Matt and I go to Academy of Management. Like that thing can like can have like hotels that are like many blocks away from one another, and so there becomes like a pragmatism to just be like, am I hoofing it like across town or no? So I like my actual kind of like, what would I do? I would overcommit and then leave the big program, and then on a daily sort of basis decide which of these am I going to go to, and which of these are like say, or kind of like I need a break or what have you. But that was just kind of like an actual tactic, if you will, of how I kind of like approach a program, because I do think that before the conference is a bit of it's like overwhelming, like fitting conferences into like your regular kind of, if they fall during a teaching schedule or WFRN, which is like after the semester is over, and so I think the programs can be overwhelming, and so that's how I kind of get my arms around it. I let myself pick all of the things, and then in the moment on whichever day or the day before or what have you, I will decide which of these are the rooms that I'm actually going to go into.
Yeah, so I'll just pick up from that. So I'm gonna actually go like way back in terms of, so yeah, that's like going to the conference. But actually before going to the conference, I mean, this is a bit late for WFRM, but for next year is to set up the sessions as well. So I kind of also like, I think one of the things you have to think about is, oh, who do I want to meet? Who do I want to do this? So if there is a conference and you know, like WFRN is going to be in 24 and 26, already talk to your colleagues or people that you admire even. So I know that this isn't a really good way of categorizing academics, but let's just say there's especially even as a PhD student, like there's a colleague level, like PhD, early careers people, and then you have your mid-career people and your superstars. So it's like kind of think about, oh, can I work with these people? And then maybe try to set up a session. And looking through the program and I want to highlight two things here. One is looking at papers, you're like, oh, I definitely want to look at that because thematically that fits you. But also I would recommend, if there are people that you've read and you know their work and you know you like their work, and it's not quite what you think that you'll be interested in, but it's sometimes nice to go and see people. I almost think of this as a festival. So it's like a music festival. And if I like Bruno Mars And the title of his song isn't quite what I think I like, but I want to go see Bruno Mars to what he's up to, right? So that's how I see. So I think conferences are like festivals, and you want to get to meet the artists, right? So one way is to go to the sessions that they're at, ask, and then we'll talk about that a bit later, like ask questions and get to know them. But sometimes it also is like, hey, especially if you know them a little bit, say, hey, do you want to grab coffee during this break or that break, or do you want to have lunch? That's, I think, what you could do prior to the conference. And that happened to me as well in various ways. People even who I don't know, it's like, oh, I really admire your work. Do you mind going grabbing a coffee at this break? Some of the more superstars can get really busy, so it might be good to just say, I mean, they might say no, but if you don't risk, you never gain anything. So that's something that you might be able to do prior to the conference to get ready. And yeah, and actually, to be honest, one of the things I would recommend, especially with your colleagues and people you like, also book hotels together, like book in this, make sure that you're in the same, because what's the best time of networking is when you're having breakfast together in the breakfast buffet. Like that is one of the best times of networking. So try to figure out how you could book that together, and just even for that 10, 15 minutes, just to have that little bit of a catch up makes a huge difference.
If I could just add just a couple additional observations in total agreement with everything that's been said. I think one of the things I've done in advance of conferences is arrange meetings with publishers. And if you're thinking about writing a book, one of the best things to do before you commit to creating a prospectus or writing the sample chapters or committing to the project would be to have a conversation with a potential publisher. And that's why they're going to the conferences. They're going to sell books, but the chief editors, they are largely there to recruit authors and to have those conversations. They welcome them. Very commonly, the editor will respond and say, yes, I would love that. Let me take you out for lunch. So you might even get a free lunch out of the whole deal, right? But I remember a conversation I had with one of my publishers, and I was going to write a sociology of work textbook, which I ended up doing with Peter Makesons. And we were able to have a very productive conversation about what the publisher, this was Sage Press, what the publisher was looking for in terms of consistency within its portfolio. And one of the things they emphasized was international comparative analyses, which Peter and I had not really put into our equation. We were thinking historically, but at that brief conversation dramatically changed our project, but also it created momentum for the project that we wanted to have, that would be beyond sending an editor a blind email and with some attachment to it, right? So you're forging a connection there. So there are all of the sessions and events, and there's the opportunity to network with individuals in the academic community, but we also want to think about how you can think about advancing your if you're thinking about publishing either through journals or through monographs. The other thing that I would add as just an aside is I think there are a lot of benefits if you can afford to stay at the conference hotel. I don't know about everybody else, but I find that I need occasionally a moment to recover. I get exhausted by too much encounters being just unending, and sometimes I just like a nap. And so if I'm in the conference hotel, I can go up to my room, I can decompress for a few minutes, and then I can come back down feeling refreshed. And it also eases having arranging meetings with other people, because we're not walking blocks and blocks to and from the venue. As an aside, also, when you book a hotel at the conference, in the conference hotel, the sponsoring hotel, you do a benefit for the organization itself, because the organization commonly gets complimentary rooms for every, in the case of the WFRN, for every 40 rooms that are booked, we might get one free room that we can distribute to scholars in need or for other purposes. So staying at the conference hotel is also a nice way of providing a service to the organization itself, and helping the organization have as affordable and vibrant event as possible. So I think those are my two big shares there.
This was all such great advice. Thank you all so much. I saw Jennifer wrote, love conferences, festivals. I also love that. I'm totally going to use that now. That is a beautiful analogy. So thank you for that. Okay. So next, and we've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but how do you choose which sessions to attend? And specific to WFRN, are there any sort of go-to sessions or events that you would especially recommend for newcomers?
I'll start again. So choosing sessions, I know like Steve, I get burnt out pretty quick if I overcommit myself. So I kind of try to rank like these are the ones I absolutely need to go to, either because it's, I want to see what the artist is up to, or the paper itself is a topic that's really interesting to me. It's like very much in my area, and I want to see what the newest stuff people are doing on that. So, there are a few specific reasons you might prioritize a session, I think. But I also try to prioritize taking a break or maybe going out and seeing the city. And if there's not like a top thing I absolutely know I need to go to, I might pick a couple sessions that seem interesting, but they may not be as much of a priority. So if I'm a little tired or whatever, I'll go take a nap, or I will go walk around, or I'll go grab a coffee and just try to recollect myself or whatever. So I don't put a lot of pressure on myself to attend every single session that looks interesting. I just try to at least know there are some that are like top priorities for me, and I make sure I go to those, and everything else is just how I'm feeling in the moment. 'Cause otherwise you do get burnt out. It's hard to pay attention, 7, 10, 12 hours a day of sessions. I also prioritize professional development sessions usually, because those are opportunities for insights you don't usually get otherwise. It's like conference exclusive, right? Like I can always go read this person's paper when it gets published or ask them for a copy of it. But the PDWs, that's like inside info that, like, how often do you get to pick the brain of an editor, right? It's not widely available information. So those I think are really important too. In terms of WFRN, I want to really plug the networking dinners. Last time they were a little chaotic, which, I was organizing them, so I will own that. It was a bit messy, but we have a new format for them this year. Steve worked out something really that's going to work really effectively, I think. And I would highly recommend that. It's really great to have a context that is specific for networking, and everybody's there for the same reason. They want to have a nice dinner and talk to people. So I think that's a really, really huge thing. In WFRN this year too, I believe there's a few lunches during the conference, where in the past I don't think that was generally the case. So that'll be another good networking opportunity. Everyone will be there. There will be tables, and you will have to sit at one of them. So you might as well sit somewhere where you can meet some new people. So I think that's really cool too. For newcomers, that's very, very beneficial. Yeah, I think that's all I'll say about that.
I think we're in a groove, so mine again, I think are in a similar vein, and maybe more specific or tactical or something. So when trying to figure out like what am I interested in, or kind of which of the sessions is kind of relevant. So some of the thing I had written down is like, what are questions that I want to answer, or problems I'm trying to solve? So if I've got a project and it's like there's a thing, okay, then what are the sessions that might help me figure out that thing? Or like I was working on a paper and it was like there's this finding that I'm like trying to figure out how to write up the implications for. And it's like, okay, so I'm drawn to sessions that do that. So I think kind of like project specific. I also go to sessions with people that I want to support. So colleagues, friends, things like that. So that is another way, which might get me into sessions that have nothing to do with what what I do. But I definitely think when I was an early career fellow a couple of years back, and so that was also kind of nice. I just met some of them right in the pre-conference session, and then to be able to go and see people who had work to present. So that was cool. And then kind of new areas that you might be interested in. So like I'm working on a project that talks about like income within partners, and I'm like developing that interest. And there was an entire session on like financial strain and perceptions of financial strain and like the workplace at the conference. And I was like, great, that's awesome. So when I'm looking at how do I discern what is interesting, I kind of filter it through like, can this session help me answer a question or a problem that I'm having, whether it's like conceptual, methodological, whatever. I like the idea of like PDWs because at some conferences they can be method specific. Who might I just want to be able to be in the audience and like be a friendly face to? And then, yeah, are there kind of like new and bubbling kind of ideas that I have that this session could help me conceptualize, crystallize, think through some more, have some people to connect to things. And so I don't tend to go into if anybody has any like relation to like fitness, there's a concept called like junk volume, where you just are like moving weights around, but it's not doing anything. And so I think that's kind of the element that we're also talking about that could lead to this exhaustion where you just are thinking that I'm supposed to be in a session or I have to go or something like that. And so if I can't look at a session and kind of say, this is the thing that I could use from it or something like that, then yeah, I think it's a great time for a walk or a nap or something else.
I really don't have much to add to all of the amazing thing Matt and Sabrina already said. The one, I'll just emphasize one is like, yes, again, like don't try to like attend everything. I think it's good to try to be able to have time to digest. What I would say is, I know that this might not come in the other questions. So I would say there are some people, and I used to do this as well, and I hate myself for having done it, are people who try to not go to sessions and then pick up on work and not go to a session and go back to your hotel to do like pick up on emails or do some work or write something. Don't do that. That's the only thing I will say, because I think that is such a waste of time. Like you're there for only a few days with so many people. Go outside and just be in the lobby. And you know what? You might, even as a rest, like you might actually end up finding someone that you really enjoy talking to, whatever, but don't go into your hotel. I mean, take a rest, have a nap, sure, but don't try to like overwork by not attending sessions and then doing your normal work. You're there for a reason, which is to meet people, get to know new ideas, etc. Don't overexert yourself, but don't try to do like your normal work on top of it. That's all I have to say.
Well, again, I'm in agreement with everybody. I would add two things that I make a point of doing at conferences. One is that I try to find a session that I'm going to go to that is not directly related to my research agenda, and I think of these as being discovery experiences. So, for instance, right now I don't do any research on the sociology of music, but I might be very interested in a session on that, or a session on sociology of religion, especially if it was focusing in on Buddhism. I would find that to be very, very appealing, even though I've got nothing directly related to that in terms of my scholarly program. I found that just ignites sort of that spark of discovery again. And Heejung and I, for instance, have done a lot of work on workplace flexibility. So when I go into a session on that, I sort of know what I'm getting. But if I go into a session that's on something totally outside my area, I find that to be awakening sometimes. And it's something that oftentimes I remember far deeper than I do from the sessions that are directly in my area. But the other thing, and that's an aside, the main thing that I would say is I try to make it a point to go to the plenaries. There's a reason why the person in the organization was elected as president. And when they give a plenary address or they organize a plenary session, they are pulling in the key players the biggest names who are doing the most compelling research, and you can almost always depend on plenaries being interesting and remarkably informative. At the conference that we're planning for June in Montreal, President Ellen Galinsky is replacing traditional plenaries where it would be commonly the president speaking for about an hour or so on a topic. These are being replaced with what she calls big ideas talks. And they are very much like TED Talks. And so they're going to be short, about 15 minutes in length. And they're going to be by leading individuals in our multidisciplinary community. They're designed to stir both the emotion and the intellect. And they're also going to be video recorded. So they're going to be publicized and disseminated worldwide after our event. We're anticipating that there's going to be probably between 12 and 15 live big talks. And then there's going to be another 10 or so that are going to be just videotaped and disseminated after the event. So I think these are going to be very engaging, but irrespective of which conference, I think the plenaries are always a very good thing to structure in your schedule. Oftentimes that allows us the biggest takeaways.
Thank you, everyone. Agree. This was fantastic advice. And I also try to do at least one session that's outside of my sort of comfort zone or knowledge. And I think it is shocking sometimes how you do actually end up finding connections or inspiration, or I use them in my teaching, right? They end up building in sort of unexpected ways, which is really nice. So thanks, everyone. So next, what is your advice for getting the most out of your attended sessions? And I'm going to start with Heejung. I'm going to switch up our little pattern here. Heejung, go ahead and start us off on advice for attending sessions.
So I'm assuming this is attendance sessions where you're not the presenter, but you're attending them, right? So I know this might be controversial, but I recommend everyone to try to ask questions. I know that not everybody can ask questions, and sometimes it takes a while for people to ask questions. Don't give a 3-5 minute. It's actually it's more of a comment rather than a question thing. And please don't do like, actually it's a question, but it actually just is trying to interpret all of that in your own little research area, which is like one of my pet peeves, and I really hate it. So please don't do that. But the reason I do that, I ask about questions, is because it kind of lets, and also try to ask a question which is about trying to, not necessarily just because you want to ask it because of clarification, but trying to provoke a debate within the group. Like, especially if you have the ability to do so, to certain questions could actually start really flourishing a debate within the session that influences not just that one paper, but also the whole debate of the other papers as well, which actually is one of the best things that you get out of conferences. The other thing I would say is to try to see, especially if you're not in a rush, especially if you heard someone do a really good presentation, is to try to stay and have a chat afterwards. I think that's really where a lot of the networking happens, but also a lot of that really interesting conversations happen, because a lot of the times with the Q&A time, there's not enough time. Whereas after the session, people are much more relaxed, and you could have coffee, or, you could kind of segue into a much more meaningful conversations where you might even end up like, hey, actually, let's work together, or, can you, send me your paper? And this is where you find one of the best kind of relationships, or build most best relationships through a conference. Should we like name people? Sabrina, that's you.
I was like, I can get other. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna. But it's like I don't have much to add. I appreciate your acknowledgement of the pet peeve. Like I really don't like when people hijack Q&As and make it about, like you say, interpreting the findings into their research area. Like that's what your presentation is for. So I've just been. I tried to think of like what have been like it's a kind of like behavior. So I wrote down, I said, say something useful during the Q&A. And by useful, I mean, one of the things that I did was, I think maybe the comment was, it maybe was like a critique of how the kind of like themes had emerged or how the data were analyzed. But I had offered a different suggestion, or kind of like, have you thought of it this way, sort of a thing. And now we're like co-authors on the project. And so I think like this, I don't know, I have started to migrate into a space of like, how can the room be the most helpful for the project? And I don't know if the like kind of random, again, questions like, did you think of it this way, which is like 12 steps removed from the project because it's related to that person's like interest? I don't know that it's as like helpful. And so I'm like, can we use the room and just say out loud, like, here is a thing. I think a lot of people would reserve that to the like one-on-one, which I think is effective. But I like that. I thought that was useful. Or I hope that that was useful. I've done another one where if you're able, I've just given people like, it was something that was really closely related to what I was doing. And so I even had like a citation. And it was just like, just saying something that like put some useful information kind of into the room for the project. I thought that was like, that was something. Obviously, you know, ask something that you might be like a clarifying question. And then I also was thinking from the presenter side, even though I think this is intended for the audience, I don't know how people think about this, but in this kind of vibe of shifting maybe the kind of format of presenting it, Steve, as you just kind of mentioned for the plenaries, I'd wondered, like, is there a space for presenters to even think a bit differently of how they structure their presentation so that they are kind of like guided, like, which questions are you trying to get? Like, how can the room help you? And so I'll just put that out there if people are going either for the first time or what have you, and have a paper. Yeah, like I've been, like I said, really into this idea that like the room can help the project like move along. And I just thought that those might be some useful ways to do that.
I love that idea of like prefacing, you know, things that you've been thinking about or questions that you have or things that you would love to chat about. It's cool. Sorry, didn't mean to interject. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, all of that is fantastic advice. Just one practical thing is I always have a notebook with me, because rather than asking or telling the presenter how my ideas connect to theirs, I write it down, and then I can sort through that myself later and figure out what I can, you know, use from their work in my own work. Or maybe it just, you know, sometimes at WFRN, especially because it's so multidisciplinary, you know, you just get a brand new perspective on something you never thought about before, and I don't want to lose that, so I write it down. And then I try to organize my notes all later. Yeah, Heejung, if you can jump in, that's fine.
I just like, because I was thinking there's one thing I also forgot. One is, if you don't get to ask the question there and then just email people, because you actually you have the email. So, and actually end up with really great conversations after the conference via email, or then you set up another meeting online or something. And yeah, I always carry this with me. You can't see it. It's my notebook with all my thoughts. And then, yeah.
Well, that's a great segue to the other thing I was going to say, which is, you know, after, if I do manage to make a point of talking to a presenter after their presentation, it was something I thought, you know, was really interesting or similar to what I'm doing or whatever, I always email them after anyway, you know, even if they don't have a paper or whatever, I just want them to have some physical thing to remember that we interacted. And I think there's an added bonus in that your email now is in their, you know, Outlook or whatever. So next time they, you know, they see your name or whatever, that your email's already there. Like, they've interacted with you before, and it's easy to keep track of who you've met and who you haven't, and, you know, remind yourself how you met people too. I think that's a really, really useful thing to do. And more important, the more you think you want to stay connected with that person afterwards. You can do that with business cards too. People don't hand out business cards like they used to, but something that always stuck with me, people would give me their cards, but they would write down on the card where and when it was. So then, like, a year later and I'm like, who is this again? Oh yeah, I met them at and then you actually remember, right? Because you meet a lot of people at conferences. It's hard sometimes to keep track. But if you have that little extra cue, it makes such a big difference, I think, in cementing your connection with someone. Yeah, I think that's all I have to really add. I think the other points everyone else made were really, really useful.
Can I share just like a follow-up? Oh, sorry, Steve, I don't want to.
Oh, that's fine, Sabrina. Go ahead, and then I'll
Well,
check.
because I think the other thing that I've been thinking about too is like seeing like I think we're talking about like there's a longer arc of just kind of being able to sort of bump into people either virtually or literally or physically. And because I'm even thinking of like last WFRN, someone did that, right? She wanted to give me she wanted to help like give me some feedback, but there was too many people, and so it didn't happen. So then we connected over email, and then we were able to like get together over breakfast to like talk about it. And I just reached out to her a couple of days ago to do a friendly review of an R&R that I have, and we're like coordinating to like, you know, like when is a like, you know, a good time for her to actually like fit into her schedule. So like these things just go beyond like the conference themselves. And I think as I was getting like thinking of my thoughts for these questions, that was something that really became apparent to me. That was not clear to me when I first started or like as a grad student. I thought it was kind of like there was just so much emphasis like on the meeting and like all the magic happens there. And I just think that it's like planting seeds that just have these like all these derivative kind of effects afterwards. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
And a lot of them don't grow anywhere. You know, that's fine too. Like you might have a short interaction with someone after their presentation and never speak to them again. That's fine. It's just some of them will go somewhere and some of them won't.
Yeah, but just to also add on to that, you never know when it will come into fruition as well. It might not come into fruition in 2-3 years, but like 10 years down the line, I've been in this business a bit long enough to say like, oh, actually, I only know them since 2004, but then they've come really, become important now, so you never know. So always I love this idea of seeds.
I think I would just add a little observation on, because I think we've got some graduate students in our audience, and so individuals that might not have been to very many conferences and not quite sure how to manage oneself at these events. And so I just want to mention one small thing about etiquette and how etiquette can relate to getting the most out of the event. Occasionally, we'll go to a session and we'll find that the session is not what we thought it would be. And I believe, and the other panelists can correct me if I'm wrong, that it can be socially acceptable to leave a session before it's entirely done. And that's not rude to do that. I think people understand that we oftentimes might be able to attend only part of a session. There's a couple sort of socially graceful things that one can do. Is if it's a small session where there's only a few people in the audience, I think those are circumstances where we might want to commit to staying the entire session, because it might be perceived that we're just abandoning ship, right? And we can be very generous in those circumstances. If we're thinking that we might not be in the full session for the entire time, it would be good to sit towards the back of the room and then also not exit midway during a presentation, but at that moment where the presentations are transitioning from one person to the next. I think most commonly, even if the person who's presenting next sees a person leave, they're not going to view it as they don't want to hear me speak. I think they would view that as being that this person has another obligation to go to. But at a conference, it's not like being in a classroom where attendance is being taken and you're going to be penalized if you leave the room early. If you are not getting something out of value from where you're at, then it is reasonable to relocate yourself to another venue where you're going to potentially have a more valuable experience. And if anybody disagrees with me on that, I would encourage you to speak up, because I wouldn't want to be giving wrong advice on this.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Not that I'm a panelist. One other thing that I thought of is I think there's a lot of, we're assuming these are symposium sessions, right? There's also like poster sessions, and those do have like slightly different etiquette rules. It's much more like browsy, chatty, and especially if you're looking to meet people, I think that those sessions are especially great to attend. Okay, so what guidance do you all have for meeting new people, making meaningful connections at the conference? And is there any guidance in particular for people with social anxiety or difficulty networking? And so okay.
I'm going
Go
to
ahead,
start.
Steve.
I'm going to
Okay.
start. If you're coming to the WFRN 2024 conference, you are going to get a name tag. It's very good to have your name tag be visible. Sometimes if you're at a conference, the lanyards will be too long and your name tag is down midriff. You can fix that very easily by tying a knot in your lanyard and bringing it up towards chest high so people can see who you are, right? So you've got your name tag. That is very helpful to people. But also what's going to be available are ribbons. And ribbons can help people identify a person. For instance, we're going to have ribbons helping people identify if a person has been part of our pre-doctoral pre-conference or early career fellowship, that they've received recognitions, or if they're interested in a particular type of networking community. And if you've got a ribbon attached to your name tag, people now have a way of connecting you to others in the organization, and they can do that quite quickly and see shared interests. So I think that would be my immediate chime in on that.
Matt, I'm gonna throw it to you.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about this one because I am very introverted and I am not good at networking, but over, 15 years in academia, I got a lot better at it. It is a skill you can practice and improve. So, I definitely have a lot of trouble just walking up and talking to people, but you can absolutely just do that. Everyone's there, because we have research interests in common and everyone wants to meet people. So it can be a little intimidating if you're more introverted, but people are open to meeting everyone, especially students, I think, in particular, unless you're on the job market maybe and you're trying to get an in for the job or something. That can be frustrating sometimes, but if you genuinely just want to meet somebody, I think most people are very receptive to that, and it took me a while to get comfortable doing that. My other bit of advice, though, if you are uncomfortable doing that, is to take advantage of all the opportunities that are there specifically for networking, like the networking dinners, like the lunches where you're going to just be, you have an opportunity to sit with someone, everyone's there and expecting to meet new people. Like, take advantage of those opportunities, especially. The early career fellows program is also really good for networking. I still have some connections from when I did that back I was in that in 2014, and I'm still in touch with some people from that. So I think that's a really good opportunity as well. Two other things with WFRN, the networking, or I'm sorry, the interest communities. Some of them are more active than others, but I know like the technology one is pretty active, and I've gotten some connections through that that have been pretty useful. And the other thing I wanted to point out was a really easy way to network if you're shy about networking is to get involved with planning, like to join one of the committees of the conference organization, because that puts you directly in touch with people on the committee, and it gets you more visibility with other organizers and bigger name people, and they want help. So yeah, you have to do some work, but you meet so many different people doing that. It's really beneficial. I mean, that's how I ended up on the executive board. I stepped onto the membership committee, and I got to meet a lot of great people through that, and that helped me get up to the board position. And I don't think I would have just been able to network myself to knowing all these wonderful people if I hadn't volunteered. I wouldn't have made a lot of these connections. So I think that's a really useful tool.
Thanks. I suppose I'll throw it to Heejung next.
So I'm a massive extrovert. For those of you who know me, I will like talk to everyone and anyone. So like it's really hard to kind of talk about like what do you do with social anxiety. But what I can say is what Matt said, like try to see if you could get into the predoctoral sessions or ECR sessions. That's a massive networking thing, as well as, you know, as I said, like with the session group, is like if you're in a paper session and then you know the presenters or people who ask questions, and you could, or you go to a session and then, oh, you know, talk to people like, oh yeah, I really enjoyed your paper. And then you could, that's kind of a natural conversation starter. One of the things I did want to say was that there's people who have social anxiety, and they have a little group of friends that you came with, right? Like it could be from your doctoral program, or it could be from your department, whatever. And sometimes they just like stick to one another and they just form a little group, and that's the only people you network with. Like, please don't do that, because I think it's such a wasted opportunity to go to a conference and just hang out with people you know already. It would be great if you haven't seen them and say, oh yeah, let's meet up, whatever. But I think conferences are there to make new networks and new groups, meet new people. So be open to it and try to see, maybe via people you know, oh, you know this person, and then have a conversation through that. That's also great. But just, you know, I think, I know this is horrible because I mean, again, I'm an extrovert. So it's like, I know how difficult it is for other people to try to just have the kind of notion that people are readily kind of happy to talk to you about things, especially if it's about their own work, you know, like especially a lot of I mean, okay, I don't want to sound, okay, so it's just being recorded, but it's like a lot of kind of superstars, right? If you walk up to them, they'll say, oh, I really admire your work, right? Like they're like, they'll be like, oh, really? And they'll just talk to you, okay? So yeah, try that. And I mean, hopefully it'll work.
So I again went very tactical. So when I read this question, I am more introverted, like more like Matt, less like Heejung. But when I read, I was like, I don't deal with, I haven't dealt with like social anxiety, like the idea of kind of like approaching people. But my hang up at conferences is that I was and still am like intimidated, right? Like people in like fancy schools and like doing cool things or whatever. And so I had like, it was more of like intimidation and kind of and like insecurity. And so I've been thinking through like, all right, what might be, because while I agree that on like a 10,000 foot view, everyone's like more often than not are open, they like talking about themselves, like all that. And I found myself in some like awkward conversations that I didn't know how to like get myself out of. So because like, you know, I think there's like the common advice, you know, like you've got your advisor and they introduce you to people and then your advisor leaves. You're like, and then I'm stuck in this like conversation with this person and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. And so I, again, went very tactical and thinking about, again, how might you sort of prepare if that like approach is difficult? And so I thought that one of the things that, again, similar to my approach to the sessions, I started like trying to think of ways that you can focus on getting advice or either on work or things that you are trying to think through with the goal to actually kind of like I said, if this is your thing, like where you are kind of concerned about it, to actually just sort of have like some go-to sort of questions that are intended to get that person to talk to you and to say things to you, as opposed to you having to like try to make yourself seem interesting. Because like I said, that was my hang up. So things like you might ask about advice on like general process. So if there are students, like you might literally just like in your back pocket on a note card, just have this like when you meet people, ask them advice. Like, do you have advice on like how to use a class paper to actually like build a pipeline to getting like to like a publication? And so it's like, you don't need to know, you don't have a clear idea of what your research interests are, or you won't have to like deal with the fact that your advisor has just like, you know, just like thrown you for a loop. It's just sort of like, do you have advice on this thing that I'm trying to figure out? You might, again, also think of it in like a project specific kind of way. Like I'm working on this qualitative project on emotions, and do you have any strategies or any experience with analyzing narratives? Like, do you know somebody who does? And so again, it like, these are questions that encourage people to talk to you, and you don't have to like fill in the space. One question that I've been asking recently is also kind of like advice about like trajectory. So I've been asking a lot of people like, so how do you figure out yourself and your life purpose after tenure? This carrot that we have been chasing for so very long, and then life seems to lose meaning. What do we do with this like post tenure kind of experience? Asking for a friend. So again, as I think of kind of like strategies, if people do have anxiety or like I said, kind of like intimidation or insecurity, as is my case, you can think about, because the idea of, you can just talk to people and they're happy to talk to you. But then the question is like, what do I talk to them about? And so I think that if you genuinely are just kind of like, oh, like, do you have advice on that? I've been stuck on this. Do you know someone who might have had this? Is just like a useful, literal kind of like strategy that you can have in your back pocket, so that when you are at that table and the person who you knew kind of walks away, and then you're both just sort of hanging out and you don't exactly know how to fill this space, you might seek out their advice on something that's much more generic, that will just kind of like I say, I think smooth the social interaction.
As a fellow introvert, I really love this. This is phenomenal. I'm like writing down the questions over here. Like I need to make my note card for June. So thank y'all. Okay, so we just have one final structured question. Any guidance for follow-up after the conference to make sure that you retain and make the most out of what you learned and experienced? And for this, I'm gonna actually throw it right back to Sabrina to start us off.
Awesome. Okay, so what did I say? Okay, so I think this is the hardest part, because like the conferences, at least in my experience, like there's like a lot of energy, there's a lot of buzz, but then actually being able to like have a good system for follow-up, I have found is like the thing that I struggle with. Like even, you bring your notebook to the sessions, as Matt suggests, but it's like you do need like processing time. Like if you're gonna commit to it, and I'm not the best at it, but one thing that kind of, I think the idea that you need to dedicate time to it just needs to be a part of your plan. So whether you want this to be, I typically don't kind of go back to my room like the night of and like email people that I met that day. I just assume it'll get lost, like everybody's at the conference. So whether it is like on your travels back, or I just think that it needs to be on purpose. Just like going to the conferences on purpose, I think kind of like going through the things needs to have some intention, like if you're actually going to remember to do it. And so some other things that I've done outside of the generic, like, it was nice to meet you and what have you, I have done that. And then when I get papers in listservs that reminds me of that person, I will send them to them. So like that's something, I think if similarly, if you get something done in a project that, again, if your research interests are similar, like you can shoot those to them as a way of follow-up. For people who do social media, I do not, but I'm sure there's like a path for those kinds of connecting with people like on LinkedIn. And so then you might, as you do your professional kinds of posting, then like you can connect with people that way. But yeah, I was gonna say, I think my that I do not do, but would be my advice to others, is to kind of think about this in an intentional way, do it on purpose. And then, as I was saying before, that it's not just about this conference and about this interaction, it's like all of the potential downstream sort of like effects of that. And so, yeah, so like I say, I'll send people papers. I have, from my early career group, like small writing groups have come out of those kinds of things. So I think maybe broadening what a touch point might look like. So it's not just like, can you send me your paper? but it might be like, oh, I thought of you and there's this thing, or, so I would say being intentional and thinking about a broader array of reasons to kind of have touch points with people would be my advice for follow-up.
Great. So I'll throw the ball next to Heejung.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Sabrina said, everything just really makes sense. And I think this is something that I'm still struggling with because, you spend a lot of time preparing for the conference and you go to the conference. And what we fail to kind of calculate in is after the conference, how much time and energy you really need to kind of spend to make that conference worthwhile. And again, as someone now, I mean, I used to go to many, many conferences a year, but now I'm just really sticking to one, maybe two. And to make it really intentional in terms of making most of that one conference. And to do that, as Sabrina said, you need to kind of schedule in a bit of time for yourself to, reflect back on all the comments you've received, maybe even touching back on some people that you've gotten the comments from and say, hey, you mentioned this. Can you just explain a bit more? People are really happy to do that, but also a lot of times, you email back to people that you've gave comments to and go back and forth. And then, as Sabrina said, it could not just be about sending papers, but it could be about, oh yeah, you talked about this or that, like, how about we do this together, that together. But, and then again, as Matt said, like not now, just in the week, but like it could span on to etc. One other thing I wanted to say is that because the social media thing happened, and I think that's also another way of networking, which is viral, but then it kind of comes into person as well. A lot of the social media things happen like during the conference, or like you're just like quickly tweeting things. I don't know if that is the best way because sometimes you don't get to listen because you're like really busy tweeting, but then that is also another way to kind of form a virtual network as well, because you're tweeting things about other people's papers, and then that person, you tag that person, and then you kind of build networks and relationships through that, which I find quite useful as well. But I think the most important thing is to be quite kind of understand that to, retain a lot of that networking or the information you gain, you need to kind of carve in that time and be really intentional about doing that to make most of the conference.
You, Matt, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I have a little to add. I also wanted to mention the social media aspect. I don't use Twitter anymore, but I still use LinkedIn, and I think it's a useful tool after the conferences if you're, consistent with it, to just keep people on your radar that you met and vice versa. So it may not be meaningful connections, but it can kind of bridge the gap between, now and the next time where you are going to have a meaningful conversation with them or something, just, to help you remember what they're working on, that they exist at all. And you can leave little comments and just say, congrats on XYZ, whatever. It just keeps some of that connection going, even if it's relatively shallow. I think it's useful, especially, I mean, you don't see people for years sometimes. So it's nice to be able to keep tabs on what people are working on if they're also sharing that stuff. So I am an advocate for social media for academia.
You, Steve, anything to add?
Oh, just very quickly, like Heejung and Matt, and I suppose everybody does. I walk around with my little notepad through the whole conference. What I'll do is write notes to myself saying to do, right? I have a to-do file in my mailbox. I'll have a to-do file on my computer. But then also as I'm in events or what have you, I will write down and say, I'll usually put like a big arrow next to it and say, you should attend to this. And then following the conference, then I just flip through my notes. And I try and make sure that I follow through on all the commitments that I made during the event. And that usually does not take very much time at all, but it's just a way of organizing tasks.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks, everyone. So shockingly, we are like right on time with our schedule. I'm so impressed, everyone. So I like that, Heejung, you're gonna tweet this. So we have another 25 or so minutes left of open Q&A. So if anyone has questions, go ahead and throw them in a chat. I think while we're waiting for people to kind of think about questions and generate questions, again, oh, okay, cool. I have a question. Has anyone actually started a project with someone that you met at a conference? And like, if so, like, how did that develop? Because I think that's one of the benefits, right? Like networking and meeting new collaborators. So like, how does that happen?
Should I start?
Go
Because
for it.
I had, well, I mean, project, I don't know if, like, so I had a conference where I had this person was presenting essentially kind of my work. And I was like, why are you presenting my work? Actually, no, it's your work. I realized we have the exact same interest. And that led into a joint paper. And then that led into like, this is years, this is spanning like, now I've known her for like, I don't know, there's like 17 years. Like that turned into a project together, etc. Essentially because you realize well, I think two things is great for conferences. One is that you get to see their academic work, but also in projects, it's really important that you are kind of, you fit. There's a nice fit in terms of academic fit, not just about thematic fit or methodological fit, but like you like each other and you could work together well and you could actually see. It's like a dating scene. Okay, I said it was a festival. Now I'm going to change my mind. It's like a really great dating place where you could actually go and check out kind of potential partners for your new baby, which is a new project or paper, which I found really, and I can't imagine, especially if you're not in the same institution or in similar kind of areas, like it's such a great way to find collaborators through that, because I can't imagine where else you could be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I always find myself having so many ideas and like wanting to collaborate. I think just making those happen is challenging sometimes. Cool. Other questions? So I don't see anything in the chat, but someone could also turn on their camera and ask if you all have questions. Please feel free to hop in. Oh, I do have something in the chat. So thank you so much for this session. I learned so much. Building off what Sabrina said about an awkward meeting where you can ask strategic advice questions, I'm wondering about your methods for leaving the conversation. Oh, this is a great question. Thank you. I always find the exit awkward. Agreed. So panelists, what are your thoughts? Maybe, yeah, go ahead, Matt.
I have another session I have to go to right now. It was so nice to meet you. You're always busy at a conference. You always have to be going to something else, and it's always true. So that's a really polite way, I think, to get out of a conversation if you can find the opportunity to say that. That's what I would usually do. And it's authentic, right? Because there's always another session.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe the exact same thing, but flip it. It's something to the effect of like, well, I'm sure that you're busy. I'm sure that you have other things, like because sometimes these also happen like in the socials where technically like the sessions are over for the day. And so like putting that to them is one way. But yeah, graceful exits are important. I think sometimes too, it's okay to just declare that it is that you are gonna go, like because I'm just trying to think, what are the multiple kinds of interactions that you can kind of get stuck in. Like you might be like at a table, or it's sort of like, I don't know, where rushing away is not actually the thing. And I think too, just kind of being direct, being like, think like, it was nice meeting you, I'm gonna like float over here or go see what's going on. Like I think that that's also just like fine. Like, yeah.
My partner uses a similar strategy, and when he realized that you could do that, he was like, this is so freeing. I can just say, this was lovely. I'll chat with you another time. Other questions from our audience members? Oh, yes, Jennifer.
While we're waiting for another question, I was just going to chime in back on your question about sort of collaborations, right, resulting from this, because it really picks up on something Matt was saying before about the planting seeds, and you don't know when they're going to come to fruition, and sort of these social interactions that you have at conferences that you might not otherwise get. Quite a few years ago, I was at a conference and received a really nice email prior to the conference from someone who was interested in meeting with me. They wanted to see if I had time to schedule, a drink. I said, sure, I'd love to meet you. We went and had a drink. We had a lovely conversation, talked about work a little bit, talked about life a little bit, a lot of things. And it wasn't until quite a few years later, I was working on a project, and the project was getting fairly far along, but there was one part of the paper that I really didn't want to write at all. And I remembered this wonderful sort of expert I had met in this topic that I had a drink with, in New Orleans so many years ago, and just sent her an email saying, hey, would you like to, join this paper and, work on this part with me? And it worked well. And we actually did another collaboration together as well. So just sort of an example of these just informal connections that you make, planting a seed, and you never know what's going to happen from that quite a few years later.
That's such a lovely story.
I want to add just one thing to that, and that's that a lot of times the little connections they affect each other and they add up over time. So like you may have met two people that work together with each other quite a bit, and then they both know you maybe passingly, but that's enough between the two of them to get you invited to a project or something. Like if like Jennifer with that person you had the drink with, maybe you had a colleague and they also know that person, and that makes it just that much easier to add that person to the project. So I've had a few projects come through with people that I met through WFRN, but it wasn't directly as a result of the conversation. It was like, a bit more serendipity, but they happened to know me already through WFRN. So I think it just makes it a smoother, easier process. So yeah, the little connections connect with each other too, it all adds up.
So true. Yeah. And you never know in what ways. Okay, so we do have a question. Thank you so much for your question. It says, thanks for the session. Very insightful. My question is, how does the flavor of the conference change once you get tenure? This is a great question. I'm very curious about this question.
If I could respond to this, I think for me, the key thing is not tenure. I think it's going to the same conference repeatedly and having more time with repeat people. The first time one goes to a conference, very commonly, you don't know anybody or very few people. Second time, you'll know some people. If you go to the same conference a third or fourth time, you're likely to have a group of people that you're going to be interested in prearranging social events with and all of that. So I think there are real advantages to creating a disciplinary home or an organizational home, and say, this is my primary or my two primary organizations that I would like to dedicate myself to going to repeatedly. And so that maps on to tenure, because tenure typically comes with having a longer amount of time in a job and more experience. So I wouldn't say that's the threshold of getting tenure or not, but I would say there's a remarkable return that a person gets by going to the same events or by the events organized by the same group of people multiple times. I think that would be my response there.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Steve. Like, so like, so in the UK, at least, there's not really a tenure system. But once you go into, I think when you're like starting off in a very early career, like when you're doing your PhD, you might go into different kind of networking groups and learn societies and try to find your feet. But once you kind of find your network and group of people, then you kind of go to them. And then there's a real kind of benefit of going year on year. And you really get to know people, know what they're, what they've done before, what they're kind of going towards, and also their kind of their PhD students and like kind of their network. And it really, I find it. So I'm very much now, I only go to like 2 networks, like that's it. Like I won't go to this and that, and like I'll go to the occasional workshop, which is a small group thing. But I think there's a real benefit of going to certain networks which are really your people, and it really helps to develop. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't kind of delve into other kind of networks to just see what they're doing, but I think WFRN is especially good because it's so multidisciplinary. It almost feels like everybody goes off to like the Academy of Management or the American Sociological Association, and they bring it back into the WFRN, so I don't need to go there, and you guys kind of keep me updated and all the developments that are happening in this field. So I really love going to the conference.
Right, we have another question. Thank you for all the informative session. Just a side question. I received the email regarding the preliminary program. Asking questions or concerns regarding the preliminary program can be can be directed to Sam Castingway. And there was an email bounce back, and an email bounce back notifying that the address can't be found. So clarification question, I think, for Steve.
I received one other correspondence yesterday about this. I think it's possible that if you're replying to the email that was received, it might be going to our conference platform, Meeting Savvy. So the main thing is that you would want it to go to workfamilyrn@gmail.com. I'll put that in the chat. And if that bounces, then send an email to our executive office, which is info@wfrn.org. I know I said those too quickly for you to be able to record, so I'm going to put both of those emails in the chat. And there are constant challenges in managing communications now with spam blockers and with firewalls and all of that. But I'll put those 2 emails in the chat, and I'm so sorry that you had difficulties doing a response back.
And thanks for raising that.
I'm just going to throw that out there. If this was copied and pasted and not typed, family doesn't have an I in it. And so it might be I don't know if it's just a simple typo, if this was like copied from wherever. Yeah. I would also like to comment on the tenure question, because I think that those of you who have been chilling in tenure for a while I think the conference is different. So I would imagine, as what is being said, is that it's more chill because you know more people. And the idea of what Steve said of continuously going is certainly true. Like the reason why I was on the executive board of WFRN is because I've gone since I was a grad student. The same is true. I'm a part of a teaching society, management and OB teaching society. The same thing is true. Like if you keep showing up, you will start to see people. That being said, to the direct question of like the flavor of the conference, I certainly think so. Like, I think people who are pre-tenure are far more eager. You're the one who is more likely to be doing the presentations. I'm just riffing now, but like, I think people who got students or junior faculty, they're like, you can do this presentation. I don't need to prepare this thing. So I would say that yes, that the flavor is probably different. In like just kind of like a rubber meeting the road kind of a way. But I think the more I love the advice of committing to an organization and not bouncing, because then you will be able to like get the opportunities to be on the committees and do the planning and become more immersed and then have all this serendipity and everything else that comes with it.
I do think that's a really good point. And that also reflects some of my experiences in thinking I am much more excited to support a student in doing their own presentation. Although I have to I am still pre-tenure. So I do, right, still have to have something where I'm up there, I'm talking, and then that gives me more opportunities to make connections for, as Matt mentioned at the very beginning, these people could be my tenure letter writers, right? So somebody needs to see me talk about my research. Probably less so after I get tenure.
Yeah, after tenure, which was very recent for me. This is my first year after tenure. It is a lot more chill. There's no pressure to be visible anymore. And I find over the years, and it's part of the experience part too, I've shifted from being very focused on the sessions and attending all these sessions and feel less grindy about it now. I'm not going to just sit there and attend sessions all day long to get the most out of the conference because I need to be productive, and all that pressure you put on yourself, that's gone now for me, and I can enjoy the conference a lot more. So it definitely, I think, changes the vibe. But part of that, I think, is also just the experience, because by the time you get through tenure, like Steve was saying, a lot of people that are at the conference every year, and all the little interactions you make over the years add up to the point where you've interacted with lots of people and you remember them and they remember you, and you may not be working on stuff together or whatever, but it makes the whole thing less, it's much more informal and relaxed when you know everybody. So that's just kind of what happens over time.
Other questions from our groups or among our panelists, things that have sparked ideas or thoughts as we've had our conversations here?
I have a question for everyone. Do you usually go to the whole conference? Do you just try to focus on around your session? I'm just wondering what other people's approaches are. Because I usually would like to go for the whole conference, but most conferences I end up having to leave a day early or come a day late or something like that.
So I want to say that so when I used to go to when I was a PhD student, I had a lot of funding to go to conferences, and I think I went to 4 or 5 conferences a year, if not more, and including all these smaller workshops. And now I go to 1 or 2, but then I'm this time I'm doing everything. I'm gonna go from Monday to the pre-doctoral conference, the ECR network events. I'm gonna go to every session. I'm gonna meet people. And unfortunately, Steve, we were just talking about how it was so great that there's so many papers. I thought the conference will end at 3, so I have my flight booked at 7 o'clock, but only to realize the conference runs a bit later. And I was devastated because I will miss that last session. And I'm just oh, that's so, because my intention was to literally do the whole thing. And I think again, we talk about meeting people, and that would once you start doing that, then you go to the whole thing. I think it really, you start, really being, getting a lot of, it's exhausting, but I am, taking time to prepare for it, but also taking time to kind of relax back afterwards. But yeah, but I used to not, but with WFRN, I'm increasingly, if I'm going all the way to North America for this, I'm gonna, really go all in.
Yeah, again, it depends on like I said, kind of the vibe. The smaller conferences that I've been going for a long time, I'm pretty dialed in. I'm pretty on kind of Heejung's level of commitment. When I'm in the sea of people, I think to your point, there are it's more stuff, but fewer points that are interesting. And so yeah, then the commitment to the schedule is just less.
There is a question in the chat. So more of an administrative question. Is there an expectation or a date to update your abstract to the WFRN conference? So again, maybe a Steve question here.
Yes, so the preliminary program is now available on our conference website at wfrn.org. And our plan is to have the final adjustments to that program completed by April 15th and the final program distributed by May 1st. But I think you can anticipate that the timing of sessions, et cetera, are going to be comparable to what you're seeing in the preliminary program, with just minor changes. The approximate to April 15th, we'll send out instructions on what we're looking for in more detailed abstracts, and also some guidance on creating and structuring your presentations. And so we're just allowing everybody to move their research a little bit further forward before we send those more detailed instructions out. The main thing that we're asking participants to do at this point is look at the preliminary program. After most presentations, there is a marker indicating whether the registration, paying your registration fee and membership fee, is complete. And if that's not indicating that it's complete, then one would log back into the membership portal and pay any remaining fees. And we'll be in contact with any authors that if there's any concerns about their papers being moved from the preliminary program to the final program in advance of publishing that. So look for more detailed instructions coming in mid-April.
Steve, that's very helpful. All right. Well, I think we are just about at time. So I would like to thank Jen and WFRN and et cetera partners named by Jen at the start of this session for helping to put this on. I'd like to thank our outstanding panelists. You all have provided some amazing advice, many of which I wrote down and I'm excited to use. And thanks to everybody who attended or is watching this session. We really appreciate y'all's involvement, and I'm excited to see everybody in just a couple months. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.